Hello, my friends. Welcome to Origins. My name's Don Chapman, and it's my great honor to be your host. You know, Origins is a forum where we take the evidence of science and we use it to validate the truth of creation. Our guest today is Dr. Don DeYoung. And Dr. DeYoung, it's so good having you, first of all.
Thank you, Don.
Your interest in weather. Weather in the Bible. Now, I think of weather, I think of the weather, you know, to find out if it's going to snow or rain tomorrow. A little more to it than that. Does the Bible say anything about weather?
Well, it does. We're all interested in the weather. It's a part of science that we can all easily relate to. And yes, Scripture does have many things to say about how the whole weather system operates.
Fascinating.
Especially in the Old Testament and in the book of Job. There's one interesting verse in Job 37:13, talking about the weather and how God controls it. And the verse says that He, God, causes it to come, that is the clouds and weather, whether for correction or for His land, or for mercy. Right there we have some reasons why God sends all kinds of weather to us.
So weather can be judgment. It can be, I assume land means to water the earth so the crops can grow. And then mercy is that good weather is a sign of His blessing. Am I reading that right?
Well, yes. And let's think about some examples.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to correction, this could also refer to God changing the course of history, stepping in now and then to make it go according to His plans.
Intervention.
And there are interesting examples to think about. In fact, even back in the Old Testament, several times when God used the weather, let's say to change the course of people. An example, well, one would be Noah, the great flood. There's a weather
big one.
extreme.
That's right. Changed everything.
And of course, Jonah, whose direction was changed toward Nineveh by a storm at sea.
That's right.
The way these operated in the past. And even in more recent centuries, I think we can still see the hand of God overruling history. He's certainly in control. There are some fascinating examples. In fact, one goes to about 4 centuries ago in Europe when the country of Spain were much in control of the world. And actually in England there was a rebellion going on. And so Spain sent a host of ships up that direction to get control. The Spanish Armada, more than 100 ships. Now, if this had actually come to play, we don't know how history would have turned out. First of all, a storm came up in the English Channel, and they had to anchor out at sea. And England didn't have a very strong navy, but what they had, they took their ships, put tar on board, set them on fire, tar ships, and let them drift among the Spanish vessels, and made them scatter, caught them on fire. And the storm itself then came up and sunk the rest of the ships. Wow. Spain has never returned to dominance since this time. As the history books say, God's wind blew and they were scattered.
So God had a lot more to do with defeating the Spanish Armada than the English Navy.
Well, He truly did.
Yeah.
Again, it's God's control when He wants to step in and modify history. There's another example in more recent times. In fact, the year is 1940, several decades ago, World War II. At one period, hundreds of thousands of British soldiers were trapped on the shore of France. And they were right up against the sea. And here comes the enemy, the Nazis actually. It could have been a terrible situation. But instead, it got very cloudy. And the airplanes couldn't fly. And for about a whole week, the war came to a stop. Now you have all these Allied soldiers on the seashore. And another thing that happened in the English Channel, an unusual calm came to take place. And as a result, many small British ships of all sizes came across the English Channel, picked up these Allied soldiers and brought them back to England to safety so that they could fight another day. If that hadn't happened, the whole course of World War II and of the world could have been dramatically changed, and who knows in what direction. Winston Churchill calls this evacuation of Dunkirk a miracle of deliverance.
Amen.
Fascinating times, the way that God can control history, and there are many others examples as well. The past, the Old Testament, kind of like the present with Dunkirk. And even in the future, we have some prophecy of controlling the future later on. In end-time events, for instance, in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 12, it mentions that the sun will be darkened as if its thermostat is turned down. I don't know if that means a colder period.
Wow.
A few chapters later in Revelation 16:8, it says that the sun is brightened and scorches people.
Yeah.
It sounds like a very fearful time for those who don't know the Lord and are caught up in that time.
But in both those passages, it shows us that our God controls the sun, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I remember a few years ago in our hometown there was a dust storm just during the afternoon, and you could look right up and see the sun. And people didn't understand this, and they were stopping and getting out of their cars to look at the sun. They were upset. If anything happens to the weather to make it unusual, people wonder what's going on.
Yeah, they sure
and
do.
it kind of shows how important the weather is to us. And again, in the end times when there's dramatic changes, you want to be on the Lord's side, so you're on the side of power there.
You sure do.
Well, that's God's correction and control of the weather. The second part of the verse we looked at earlier talks about His love and its care for the land, and that's a positive area. There are many parts of the weather that are just a joy and interesting to look at, and so we might just consider some of the components of the weather. And one of the first ones to look at is this thing called the water cycle. Now, this comes from the school books, and we know how this operates. You have a pond or a lake or an ocean, and on a sunny day, the water evaporates, and up into the air it goes, and then maybe clouds form, and it gets over land, and then down come rain or snow, and it can either soak into the ground and become part of the water table and slowly ooze back to the sea, or it can be in a surface river. One way or the other, this water goes round and round. It's the water cycle, and it's a wonderful system. Now, maybe sometimes it rains when you don't want it to, but it's a miracle. I mean, think about this, Don. Does this happen on the moon?
No, sir.
Or on Mars? Nowhere else. It's perhaps only here in the whole universe, this precious water cycle. Now, let's look at a few of the components of the weather. How about thinking about raindrops? You know, we typically draw a raindrop as a sort of a teardrop shape. There's one with a little smiley face. I'll give you a choice. Do you suppose they look like we draw them, or are they more flattened, sort of like a mushroom or a marshmallow?
I'm going to go with the one without the smiley face.
Some choice we have here.
Okay.
Well, photographs show that the real shape of a water drop when it's falling through the sky is more flattened, more pancake shaped. It's the air and the pressure underneath that makes it form that way, but it's still more fun to draw them in a teardrop. But we're still learning things about water as down it comes. Now, of course, in the winter season, instead of raindrops, you might get a snowflake. What a beautiful part of creation that is, with the 6 points and small ice crystals. Now, have you heard this idea that every snowflake is different?
I have. Is that true?
On the inside, every snowflake is different. The statistics say there's no way they could be identical. Even you could put one stray atom, an atom of carbon or nitrogen, inside those trillions of atoms, and it would be different. So at least microscopically, they are all unique.
That's amazing.
Of course, likewise, so is every grain of sand, every blade of grass, every kernel of corn. There are no two identical things in nature. It's the way God made creation.
God is a God of infinite
and only He
variety.
can control all those possibilities. Yes. Well, another component of the weather, of course, are the very seasons that we enjoy, caused by the Earth moving around the sun once a year, and the Earth is tilted. We have this 23.5-degree tilt of the Earth that it maintains. On our orbit, the sun hits below the equator. That would be summer down under. The other half of the year, the sun is above the equator, and that's our summertime, so it kind of alternates, and it's just round and round the Earth goes. Now, we have several planets in our solar system, and they don't all have the same tilt. Some have less of a tilt. They don't have any change of seasons. Other ones have a more dramatic tilt, and they have greater, more extreme seasons. I think we have just what we need for the growing season and the harvest and all the other parts of that. It's a wonderful system, the way it all operates. Now, some might say, well, I don't really care for the Earth's weather. Sometimes it's too hot or too cold. So it might be interesting to compare with one or two other places just to see how it goes. This is our average temperature on the Earth, about 70 degrees. Of course, the Arctic could be colder and the tropics warmer, but that's our average. Compare with another place. Now, for instance, the planet Venus. It's a little bit closer to the sun than us, about 30% closer. And it has a runaway greenhouse effect with a temperature of 900 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's a little warm.
I don't think the kitchen oven even gets that warm. That would melt it down. And this is the temperature all day, all night, all year. It never changes on Venus. It just cooks. We have not sent anyone to Venus. They couldn't survive. In fact, we've sent a few space probes there, and they last a few minutes, and then they melt and stop transmitting. It's a very bizarre place. Well, now that was closer to the sun. Let's get further out from the Earth, and then you go to Mars, where the temperature can reach way down to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit. It varies somewhat, but it can get that cold, colder than it does anywhere on the Earth. You notice the idea that this is just right. The Earth is neither too hot nor too cold, but in just the right position where we have the kind of seasons that we need.
God has fine-tuned the temperature for us, for humanity.
It is. Some have joked it's sort of like the story of the three bears. Neither too hot nor too cold, but it's programmed, it's created, it's designed for us. You know, there's something interesting about this thermometer that we might demonstrate here, Don. It involves a special property of water. Now, we brought some water along here, and we kind of take water for granted. If you turn the tap, it just better be there. But you know how important that is around the household. But what I'm going to do is take some water, and I'm going to put it in this plastic sandwich bag. I think this will hold water for at least a little while. Let me get that in here. Now, what I propose to do, Don, is to try to set this bag on fire.
Okay.
Okay. Now, you might say that doesn't sound like a very good idea because
it doesn't seem very hard to think you could just set it on fire. Yeah.
You could burn yourself, and you know how plastic curls up and melts.
Yeah.
But we've got water in this bag, and that makes it different. So what I'm going to do is light a candle just so I can keep it going for a moment here. Let me see if I can get this working. And now, what was our idea to take this and put it in the fire? Let's see what happens.
It isn't curling up, it isn't burning.
It's starting to turn a little bit black on the bottom.
Well, that's just the soot from the candle.
Yes. What's happening is water has what we call a large heat capacity. And all the calories, all the heat are going right through the membrane of the plastic into the water and protecting. I wouldn't want to do this with a dry plastic bag. I'd be in trouble.
It would curl in a hurry.
In fact, if I was in the kitchen, I wouldn't want to do this with any other liquid. What would you have? Corn syrup or ammonia or whatever? I think it would still catch on fire. But water
too heavy.
Really holds heat.
And the water conducts the heat away from the bottom, and that's why it doesn't burn it up.
Exactly right.
That's fascinating.
And really, this little demo here is why we can live on the Earth. Can you imagine if the seas were dry and all the lakes? What if there was no water anywhere?
The sun would cook us up, wouldn't it?
During the day, when the sun comes out, the temperature of the Earth would jump up to about 200 degrees. And every night, the temperature would drop to minus 200 degrees. It would just be out of control. I don't think we could survive those temperatures. See, the oceans are like a grand reservoir. They soak up extra heat during the day, so it doesn't get too hot. And they give off that warmth at night, so it doesn't get too cold. We've got all the water. This planet's 3/4 covered with water, and that's the purpose of it, so that we can live here.
Isn't that amazing? God has so fine-tuned the earth for us. What a great designer.
Even with a world that's been cursed and is no longer perfect, you can still see how God has put this together for our survival and comfort. Well, we're talking about the components of the weather. Let's hit another one here. And this is the very air that we're breathing, the atmosphere. And so here's a list of the components of the air that's in a room and on the earth and everywhere. And it's an interesting mixture. In fact, some might think that our atmosphere is oxygen because that's what we breathe. But actually, our atmosphere is about 3/4 nitrogen. And then oxygen comes in second place, and then there's a few other additives as well. It's an interesting collection of atmosphere that no other planet has. Now, some critics have looked at this list, and they've said, well, that's kind of a strange collection. That doesn't look like creation. We need oxygen. And they'll even kind of make jokes and say, maybe God made a mistake. Maybe it was supposed to be 78% oxygen and 21% nitrogen. Well, think with me for a minute. What would happen on this earth if we really had 78% oxygen?
Oh, oxygen makes things burn, doesn't it?
It is. It's flammable. It's very active. That's why in hospitals we have signs to watch out for sparks and static electricity.
Don't smoke in bed if you're on oxygen. Yeah.
Don't ever smoke in bed.
Well,
exactly.
Especially if you're on oxygen.
Yes. Actually, I think what happens here is God has placed this nitrogen in our atmosphere to dilute the oxygen to make it safe.
So it's enough for us to breathe, but not enough to make it unsafe.
Yeah. Nitrogen does not burn. It's not poisonous. You can't smell it, taste it. It's just there. It's like a carrier, which makes the whole thing suitable and possible. Even experiments have shown that if you change that oxygen amount very much, you're in trouble. If you boost that up to 25%, spontaneous fires could break out.
Wow.
If you take it down to 15%, we'll suffocate.
Yes.
It's got to be about 21%. There is design there.
Well, Dr. DeYoung, we have to take a break, but I want to tease the people and tell them that when we come back, you're going to do another one of your famous demonstrations. If they miss this one, they'll have egg on their face. So don't you go away. We'll be right back.
Today's guest on Origins, Dr. Don DeYoung, has a PhD in physics and is chairman of the Science and Mathematics Department at Grace College in Indiana, where he has been on staff since 1972. He is also president of the Creation Research Society and an author of many books which are available at the website www.creationresearch.org. Dr. DeYoung can be reached at Grace College, 200 Seminary Drive, Winona Lake, Indiana, 46590. Dr. DeYoung speaks on creation topics and believes that the details of nature are a powerful testimony to the Creator's care for mankind.
We are back with Dr. Don DeYoung, and we are talking about the weather. And Dr. DeYoung, we're coming up on talking about air pressure as a part of the weather, and you have a demonstration for us.
Well, Don, yes, I'd like to demonstrate the weight of the air. You know, this air is stacked up several miles above us, and it does have some weight, and it pushes down on us, but we don't usually notice it. And we can make this work sometimes. What we have here is a jar. I think this had breakfast juice in it, and it's just empty now, just a small opening on this empty jar. And speaking of breakfast, I also have here a hard-boiled egg that's been peeled, so it's kind of rubbery. And let's see, well, it doesn't fit. It's too big to go into the jar. Now, do you suppose that we can get the weight of all the air above us to push that egg into the jar? One way to do this is to get rid of some of the air that's already inside the jar so that the air above can push back on it. And you can do that by building a small flame inside the jar, which will push some of the air out, and then hopefully in the egg will go.
So the air pressure would become less in the jar and in the egg goes.
Exactly. Okay. It's a difference of pressure.
Burn up the air inside.
So to do that, I'm going to light a little piece of cotton and then quickly put that egg back in place here, and we'll see if we can make this work today. And let me get the cotton going, and then we'll get that flame in there. This happens quick now, so keep an eye on it.
I'm ready. In it goes.
Into the jar it goes. And there's the egg.
Oh, look at it bounce up and down. Oh, hey, it's in there. Way to go. All right.
Don't let it get away. Capture it there.
Yes, sir. So when there was no air in there, the air pressure from the outside pushed it in. Is that?
That's right. This air, I mean, it adds up to many tons above us. We just don't notice that because we have air in our bloodstream and in our lungs. We're in equilibrium. But if we could make a difference, in it went.
Now, it's a shame to waste a perfectly good egg like that. How do we get it back out of there?
A good question. How do you get the egg back out? And let's try to do that as well.
All right.
To retrieve the egg, you need to get more pressure inside the jar, and so one way to do that is to get this egg up into the front of the jar here. Let me get that cotton out of the way, and you need to get more air behind it, so I'm going to give a puff of air on this jar, and we'll see what happens. We'll see if we can coax it out.
Okay.
We'll try this out.
Oh, and I'm the egg catcher. There we go. All right.
Good catch.
Thank you. So when you get more air in there, then it pops right back out, and I could hear that going pop. So that's fascinating. Well, that's a great demonstration of air pressure.
Even kind of a fun demo to try at home sometime if you can find a glass jar with a small opening and with a hard-boiled egg, and in it goes.
Okay.
Well, let's look at a few more components of the weather then, Don, and one involves the wind. And so here we have a windmill. What causes the wind? Why does the wind blow here and there? The way to look at this is the sun heats up some parts of the earth more than others, and to even out the temperature, the wind blows, and to even out the pressure, wind is like a spoon. It's like it's just stirring up the atmosphere to even things out. And of course, with these kind of windmills, old and new, you can even obtain that wind power to make use, and that's a good energy potential. So we need to have the wind and the breeze just to keep hot spots from forming. We're going through some of the components of the weather. We've had the air and the pressure and the wind. Another interesting one is lightning. And lightning is so dramatic and so energetic. In fact, some people might say, well, I enjoy creation, but I don't like lightning. Why did God have to make that? Well, there is a reason for lightning. Of course, lightning was studied centuries ago, and it's well known from Ben Franklin and his son who studied lightning. You know, back in his day in the 1700s, we didn't really understand lightning. Is it a gas burning? What's going on in the sky? And it's not very safe to have kite experiments, but apparently that was part of early history to realize that lightning is like a big spark. It's electrostatics, electricity. And Ben Franklin, along with his politics, was also an excellent scientist and did some of those early studies. Lightning has purposes. All of nature does. It's also well designed for us. So someone might ask, what is it good for? I mean, it does start fires, and it can be very fearful, but it has its place. Here's a chemical formula. What we have found out is that lightning has enough energy to take nitrogen that's in the air, and there's a lot of it, and it'll crack that molecule in half and separate those two nitrogen atoms and combine those with oxygen. This is the energy of lightning, and it makes what's called a nitrate. Then this drifts down to the ground, and the plants can take it up. And then the cows eat the plants, and we drink the cow's milk. One way or the other, this is how we get nitrogen in our bodies. We can't use it out of the atmosphere. Someplace on the earth at all times, there's got to be 100 lightning storms going on, pumping millions of tons of nitrogen into the soil.
I didn't know that. That's
Now, there are
tremendous.
some plants that can do this automatically. They call those legumes, clover and such, and they do their part as well. In fact, farmers still put additional nitrogen on the soil now in the spring. But lightning also plays its part, and it takes that kind of spark energy to combine these molecules to make nitrates. It's an important part of our whole soil system, a purpose for lightning. One more component of the weather that's kind of interesting are clouds. We've learned something interesting about clouds, and it even involves this current topic of global warming. Suppose that the temperature is going up, the temperature is increasing. Well, what that'll form is additional clouds because there'll be more evaporation. And that's like pulling the shades, and that would make the temperature go down. There's sort of a mechanism there that keeps the temperature from getting carried away. On the other hand, if the temperature starts to drop around the world, well, then there'll be less evaporation and less clouds. It'll be like opening the shades, and then the temperature will go up. This is called a feedback mechanism that keeps the temperature of the Earth from changing in any dramatic way. And there are several systems like that in nature. You don't often hear them talked about. But I think it's all part of the design so that our temperature on the Earth stays a comfortable one for us. What does the weather guys and gals do to control the weather, to predict it? Very complicated. They take the whole atmosphere and divide it up into cells like this and then try to figure out how they affect each other. It's very complicated. They have a hard time. Weather is very complex. We understand very little about it. We do have a rainbow promise of no more storm like we had at one time. That's positive. And there's good weather coming. A verse from Ezekiel talks about a future day when there'll be showers of blessing. I like that verse. Future weather will be perfect in God's time.
Well, that's awesome. Mercy drops around us are falling, but showers of blessing are coming. You know, my friends, as I look at weather, and Dr. DeYoung, what a tremendous job you've done of showing us God's hand in all of this. But, you know, when I look at it, I just know that I can trust my Creator, that He has loved me and that He has made this world perfect for me. You know, my friends, I don't want you to forget that it's God's view, that He not only made the world and the weather, but He made you. And that should be your worldview too. I hope that God will bless you until I see you again here soon on Origins. God be with you till then, my friend.
Thank you for watching this edition of Origins. To get a copy of the information presented today, you can download a PDF file of program number 1105 from our website at www.originstv.org. Or for a DVD of this series, send a $12 donation to cover shipping and handling and write to Origins, program number 1105, Cornerstone Television, Wall, Pennsylvania 15148.
Origins is made possible by the faithful prayers and the financial support of you, our Cornerstone Television family.